Good morning and welcome to the Outboard Dad channel. We're here to dispel that myth of the two best days of the day you bought it and the day you sold it, with simple maintenance and training you how to take care of your outboard motor and your boat properly so you can have the best boating experience. Have you ever been stuck out on the water and have to call sea tow because your motor just won't start after you've been out all day maybe running it, or maybe you're only out for a short period of time? It's very disappointing when that happens with your family or with friends when you're out on the water. So let's get into some of the things we can do, and I want to give you one of the secrets today of how to maintain your outboard motor, one of the most important things that needs to be taken care of, and that's the water pump. So in my previous videos, we took the lower unit off of the outboard motor, and now we're going to get into the water pump. I'm also going to drop a few short videos on the local marina that I went to, very helpful in getting me the right parts. I also brought the old parts with me, which is key to getting the right parts that you need. The worst thing is spending your Saturday morning or a Sunday working on your motor and not having the parts you need, and now they're not open, or you get there and it's crowded. So we want to do that as well. Now you can also order parts online, but it's always good to have that relationship with someone at a local marina who can help you. So let's look at what's in the box here. So our water pump kit comes, we have several parts, and they probably match several different motors. So you want to look at the instructions, right? I'm a big proponent of reading through the instructions. So we want to go through those, and we want to make sure we're using the right parts and it's assembled properly. So this is the water pump housing, comes with a metal cup, and then of course our impeller, which is really what gets the wear. Now a lot of times, as you saw when we removed our water pump wasn't in bad shape. The housing is still in good shape, it's intact. Even the O-ring around it is still in good shape. So this was replaced recently, and there's no reason to replace all of that. So we're just gonna rob the impeller itself out of this kit, and we're gonna save these parts because we're gonna need them for future replacements, right? And then in the future, now we have the part number for just this water pump, and we can just order that as needed. So let's get into how this gets assembled and put together. And we're gonna do some cleaning first on this and show you how this all goes together. So you notice here I have the lower unit securely mounted in my vise. I put a rag in there just to protect it a little bit so I don't mar it up too much. But we want to keep it nice and tight so it doesn't fall out. So as we move in here, we're going to see where the water pump mounts, right? You can see the seal there that goes around our drive shaft, right? You can see the 4 bolts holding the bearing assembly in. And we're going to have to scrape this gasket off and clean this up so we have a good surface to mount our gasket and plate to. So let's clean this up. Okay, so we're going to take our little scraper here. It's just a little Harbor Freight tool with a nice sharp, right? I want a good sharp blade in it because I don't want to cut into the aluminum. I just want to scrape this gasket off. All right, so we want to get it as clean as we can, make sure there's no gasket material left on it. So now that I've got most of the heavy stuff scraped off of it, I'm going to take a piece of sandcloth. This is just plumber's sandcloth that I'm going to use, and I'm going to go through this and clean it up as best that I can so I have a nice mating clean surface to mount to. So once we get it sanded off and we have a nice clean mating surface for our gasket to stick to, we want to blow it off with some compressed air. If you don't have an air compressor, you can use one of the cans that you use to spray off your electronics or your computer. But we want to make sure it's clean. We don't want any debris getting down into this section here where the water pickup is, because that will clog up your water pump and cause more damage to it. Also, we want to have the bolt holes where the bolts go back in to be cleaned out, not have any debris, so it doesn't jam up when we put the bolts in there. Make sure you wear safety glasses when you do that so you don't get stuff in your eyes. Okay, so our next step is we're going to use this weather stripping adhesive. It's actually a Permatex product, right, that we can use. And that's what gets used on all these water pumps, on all their seals, because it's weather tight. And we put a thin layer after we clean the surface here, and we also put a thin layer on our gasket, right? So we're going to slide that over. We're going to make sure our holes line up properly, again, following the instructions. And then we're going to take our plate, which goes on next. This is the water pump plate. Again, matching the same holes, and we're going to line that up together and make sure our holes are lined up so our bolts will go through. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn the shaft here. You see there's a a flat spot on this shaft. So the secret here is we're going to use a little bit of silicone grease, right? We don't want to use anything petroleum based because we don't want to eat away at the rubber. So the petroleum or the silicone will not eat away at the rubber, right? I learned that the hard way by burning up rubber and wondering why I can't pump enough water through my outboard motor. So I'm going to put a little dab of grease on here, right? There's a keyway that matches this water pump. This water pump impeller only goes on in one direction, right? If you look at the other side of it, it has a lip and it won't allow the keyway to go through it. So when we look at this water pump, we're going to put this keyway on and we're just going to stick it on using that grease so it holds in place. And then we're going to take our water pump and we're going to also add this O-ring that has to go on the plate first, right? So we're going to slide this O-ring over. Some people like to put the O-ring on the water pump impeller first, right? Have to remove that keyway I just put on there to squeeze this over. So our keyway goes on here. Our water pump impeller now slides over the top, lines up with our keyway, right here, and then it'll slide right over into place, right? So now we have our new impeller installed and now we're ready to install the housing. So another little trick to make it a little easier to install the housing, and some people like to put the impeller in the housing first and twist it into place, and you can do that as well, whatever works best for you. But again, I take a little dab of this silicone grease and I put it on each one of the ears of this impeller, right? Because this gets kind of worked into place, right? So I don't put a lot on there, just a little bit to lubricate it. So when I slide the housing over, and let's see how easy this goes on, right? So it can be a little tricky at times, but if you work with it. Now again, I already put sealer around the face of this. The old O-ring was intact and in good shape. It wasn't flattened out, so we're reusing it. Some people would say not to reuse it. That's certainly your choice. I've done it this way several times without a problem. So we're gonna slide this into place. Now, lining up the bolt holes is one thing, but now we have to get our impeller in place. So now I want to turn the crankshaft or the drive shaft clockwise, right? And now it's working it into place, right? Working it down. Give it a good twist, and then it goes into place, right? So now I can turn my crankshaft, my drive shaft, and I know that my impeller is free inside there. So now I can go ahead and put the bolts in, right? So I can either reuse the old bolts that came with it, or a lot of these kits will give you new bolts as well. So we want to put them in, make sure we're lined up with our gaskets and our plates, because sometimes it shifts a little bit when we put the water pump in. But we don't want to crank these down super hard, right? You did notice I used the ratchet, the electric ratchet, to remove them, but putting them in, I like to do them by hand and make sure I don't over tight them, because all this is really plastic, right? So let me get our socket wrench for this. I'm going to start with just a hand tighten. Make sure everything goes down smoothly. And I'm going to do it evenly, right? I'm not going to tighten one all at once. I'm going to tighten one at a time. Make sure the gaskets meet their surfaces and seal off. Now before I get it completely tightened, I'm going to take my channel locks and I'm going to grab this shaft and I'm going to go ahead and give it a spin to make sure it spins freely. It's going to be very difficult to spin by hand, so you're going to need to grab it a little bit, but everything spins freely. Now I continue to tighten this down, and once they're all down in place, I'll give them a little bit more tighten with a ratchet and you'll be ready to go for your next ride out on the water, pumping freely. So when we put this on the motor, now we want to get it out there and we want to run it on our hose to make sure everything is flowing freely. So that's a typical water pump replacement. When we come back in our next video, we're going to reinstall this. We're going to use some grease here on the spline, because that's what comes with the kit as well. And take some time, read through those instructions and see if there's anything else that you need to do. Next step we're going to do before we actually install this is we're going to replace our lower unit oil. We'll show you how to do that next. So before I forget, before we get to that lower unit oil, we had a bolt here, if you remember, that was stuck in place, right? It was very difficult to get out. So I put some penetrating oil in there, I put some WD-40 in there, let it sit for a couple nights. And now what we're gonna do is, we're gonna take our hammer and our drive pin, right? We're gonna put our safety glasses on, because when we start hitting something, you know, there's always a chance of a piece of metal flying off. But I like to use the drive pin with the small point on it. This way I don't damage the threads on this bolt. So I'm gonna put it right on the center and I'm gonna shock it a little bit, and let's see if we can get it to move. And it is moving pretty well. The oil did its job. So we're gonna drive that straight home, and there we go. So not a big deal. We did break it loose, but you can see some corrosion on this bolt. So when we put this back in, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a wire brush, like a pipe cleaner, and I'm gonna work it in and out of this to be sure I get it very clean. And then we're gonna put grease on this bolt before we put it back in, covering the entire bolt, not just the threads. This way, not only will it loosen, but it'll stay open in that sleeve. So that's what we wanna do. So now, basically we're ready for the next step, which is lower unit oil, and that'll be in our next video. Thanks for joining. Please hit that subscribe button. If you have any questions or comments, please add them to this. If you're working on your outboard and you're having a trouble with it, please send me any questions you have. I'd love to help you out with it. And again, subscribe and like, and thank you for watching this video of the Outboard Dad. Have a great boating experience.